Hello everyone and welcome to another Scots Whay podcast, and tonight I am joined by writer Tom Gillespie. Hello Tom.
Hello there.
And we're going to be
Thank you very
talking,
much for having me.
well, it's an absolute pleasure, and it really is a pleasure because we were having a chat just before we started here, and we're going to be talking about your book, The Strange Book of Jacob Boyce, which I have it here. And you very kindly asked me to read it before it was published. And it's such a thrill to read a book that you genuinely go, wow, this is unlike something I've read for a long, long time. And just something really new. It's quite exciting. So can you tell us about the book? What is it from your point of view before I start telling you what I think?
Well, I'm really chuffed that you liked it so much, and I was saying earlier that I just wanted to thank you for your support for this book, because we're living in difficult times, and it's been quite tough, and that support has been incredible.
Well, it's a genuine pleasure, Tom. Absolutely.
Yes. So the book, yes, I wrote down. I was just before we came on. I started to write down some stuff, and then I just ended up kind of like scribbling it all out and just putting down one word, which was deception. And I thought, actually, I've written a whole load of others, and I just kept coming back to that. Basically, I'm really fascinated by the whole idea of deception, and how you can play that out, how you can work that through a story and a narrative, and develop it, and develop characters that are busy deceiving either themselves or others, and elements and bits and pieces of the jigsaw that makes up the narrative to create this deceptive environment. And I really love that about it. That's a sort of like, that's the deeper level. But of course, on the surface, it's just a book about this guy, Jacob. And I was thinking about him tonight as well. And I was thinking, I remember when I gave my old man a quick look at, I had a manuscript from way back. It was in its first early sort of embryonic stages. And I had this guy, Jacob, and my dad read it through, and he said, he's a right one, isn't he? And I thought, well, that's what he is. He's an absolute right one. And I think, that Jacob obviously sits in the middle of this whole story, and in many ways, without giving away too much, his deception is a self-deception in a way, and that's kind of wrapped up in his obsession with this Baroque painting, this fictional, whatever, Baroque painting that's hanging in the Glasgow City Art Gallery. Kelvin Grove isn't named, but
yeah, I was thinking
that. I know that's where it is.
Yeah, well, anyone who's ever been there knows that's where it is. I think.
Yes.
I mean, one of the great things about the book, actually, and we'll maybe talk about it later, is there's a really strong sense of place.
Yes.
Certainly, I mean, I also know Glasgow well, but I also know Barcelona fairly well as well. And there's, you do have a real strong sense of place there. So even if you don't name, people know by the walks that you take and how to get there, yes, and all sorts of things. I'm really interested in this. Yeah. I'm interested by this idea of deception because I hadn't thought about it that way. But yes, there's self-deception, but there's also deception of the reader in some ways. There's sleight of hand.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
It's
smoke and mirrors.
Exactly. Yeah. Was that part of the intention of the book then? Was to write?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was the author, deceiving the reader and drawing the reader into this labyrinth and pulling and pushing them in different directions, and also allowing the reader enough space to make up their own mind about what's going on in the story, basically. You got this guy who's obsessed with this painting, and then he goes, his relationship with his wife's fallen apart because of it, basically, and then she goes missing. So on that surface level, it's a kind of psychological thriller where he's trying to hunt down his wife and try and find her, and that trail takes him to Spain, but within that, you know, his obsession is kind of escalating and spiraling out of control, and he believes somehow that the painting and the original artist, the Baroque artist, is somehow involved or responsible or behind his wife's absence and disappearance. So when he goes to Spain, he's kind of on the hunt for both her and this artist. In Barcelona, like you say, in Madrid, and he goes to a little village too, and he's trying to piece together this jigsaw about what's going on, all the while in his head's all over the place. And
I think that's one of the things, as a reader, you're never quite sure where it's going to go, because Jacob is never quite sure where it's going to go. His kind of plan for the day, if you like, is to go and look at this painting. Yes. And take, you know, meticulous notes. I mean, to say it's obsession is underplaying it. You know, really, and
fetish.
And observe it in every kind of detail that he can. And that seems to be his plan for nearly every day. And everything else has become secondary to that.
Yeah.
So when it suddenly unfolds, you know, and he decides, well, if I'm going to solve part of this puzzle as he sees it, or puzzles as he sees it, he's going to have to go elsewhere. And I think it constantly, as a reader, it constantly surprises you. But that's a really good thing. I have to say, that's a really good thing.
I'm glad. That was the idea, to try and do that, you know. And of course, it's interesting you mentioned that Jacob's kind of like doesn't know where he's going as well, and that there's that kind of sense of loss and losing yourself, getting lost. And he's getting lost in Spain, and he's getting lost in this hunt, in this search, and also lost within his own mind as it sort of unravels. He's kind of losing track of that as well, really. But the deception was definitely, I worked really hard to layer that up from, you know, the author to the reader. Jacob's inner deception that's going on, and also the kind of the external worldly deceptions that are going on all around as well. You know, places are not quite. They're I try to design them so they're a bit off kilter. So, you know, you talk about that real sense of place, but it's a kind of like trying to invoke Mr. Grey, you know, Alistair Gray, and have that kind of hyper reality around those places.
You're right. There's a kind of dreamlike quality, and you're never quite sure, you know, for Jacob, what is real and what is just in his head. And even though you might be there are places I'm very familiar with in the book, but you're right. You kind of see them in a slightly, you know, different way. And also these ideas of kind of, for want of a better word, micro deceptions, because and I suppose it comes with deceiving yourself. To keep that going, you also have to start deceiving those around you.
That's right.
So he's holding on to work and something, you know, just about, and, you know, holding on to other things. And the only way you can do that is by kind of stretching these out.
Exactly. That's right.
Listeners might be able to tell that we are desperately trying not to give away any spoilers.
It's very difficult.
And it really is very difficult, because I would hate anyone to pick it up and have anything spoiled for them, but it's such a shame. So let's move away from the kind of details and talk a little bit about other things. Why did you decide to write this book? What are the kind of inspirations behind it?
Well, it was interesting. I was living in Spain, actually. This was back in early 2000s, actually, and we had a weekend off, and we went to Madrid. We were in Madrid, and it was boiling hot. It must have been over 40 degrees. So we were desperately trying to find places to go, and we accidentally ended up at the Prado. I don't know what happened exactly, but we just ended up there, and by this stage we were in that panic mode where it was so hot you need to immediately get out of it. Slightly hallucinogenic, you know, you're kind of overheating so much. Into the Prado, it's nice and cool and relaxed, and actually it was relatively quiet, strangely. and I'd been once before, but kind of in a different context. And I left my wife, we separated off, and I went upstairs, and I had a wander about, and then I happened to wander into the Velazquez. It's like an octangular room,
Right.
with a lot of his paintings, all his most famous paintings around the sides, on each side of this octangle. And Las Meninas is right at the sort of the front of it, and it's this massive painting, huge, and it just completely overwhelms you. It's like, I mean, a lot of paintings do that, but this one in particular is just, it actually does literally take your breath away. It's just like, oh my God, and this kind of modernist statement almost, and almost instantly I had this idea, well, this guy's trying to con us here. He's trying to trick us, because he's looking out at the painting at us, and we're looking at him, and it was a kind of, having the Robert De Niro moment, like, what are you looking at? Are you looking at me? And it's really disconcerting, because all of the characters in that scene are looking beyond the painting straight down the barrel of your own eyeballs, and it's kind of like, whoa, it knocks you for six. So I'm busy trying to take this in, feeling overheated. Meanwhile, this guy comes in a suit, and like a leather briefcase, suit and tie, black suit, walks in, opens up, gets into the middle of the floor and opens up his briefcase, and he starts taking out like a reel of thread,
right,
and a magnifying glass, right? He starts sort of putting this down on the floor, right? And he's sort of kneeling down, and then he started sort of unraveling this thread, and he had a notebook, so he was kind of like writing down these kind of like distances between the. And I was watching this guy for a minute or so, and I thought, what is he doing? This is really strange, because it's, they're tourists, and it's busy, and he's really preoccupied, totally focused. And after a couple of minutes, it's getting more and more crazy, because he's reels of thread, and he's got a little pair of scissors, and he's cutting them, and he's kind of laying them out. The two burly security guards came in and sort of handled him off the premises, took him out, and it was as though they knew him. It was as though this is a guy who returns. So anyway, that happened, and it sort of percolated, and then I went back to the hotel, and I wrote down this kind of one-page little story, like a little flash story, nothing really, just an observation of what had happened. I thought it was quite interesting. Put it in a drawer, forgot about it, disappeared for about 5 years, and then I was having a clear out, and I found this thing, and I went, God, this guy, yeah, that was really strange. And something in my brain clicked. And within sort of 20 minutes, I had his name, Jacob, and I had the sort of embryonic parts of a story. And it just started to shout at me. It's like Jacob was sort of going, you need to tell everybody this story about me, So I started to develop this guy, and what happened to him, and why he was there.
It's so interesting that I've spoken to a few writers recently. They're talking about characters who have stayed with them, almost like if you're a child, you have your invisible pal, or your imaginary friend. And they've said a lot of the characters that they have spent time with have become like that. This idea that the character starts to not take over the process, but is a hugely important part, and does things that the writer doesn't even expect them to do.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And it was a bloody nightmare, because he is a nightmare. He's a classic anti-hero, isn't he? He's and I thought, well, if we're going to make him an anti-hero, you've got to go for it full hell for leather. You've got to make him, the proper job. But I had to, I've sort of. I started thinking, this is a really interesting guy, and as it went on, he was kind of like he was with me, for a good few years, and then he's sort of like, and then he comes back, and he's back again, when we've got the launch of the book, and he's sort of, here I am, I'm back with you again, and he put him away for a while, and then he he returns, to haunt your imagination. So he's interesting.
It's very interesting. There's a question I was going to ask later, but I'm going to jump up the queue now because I think it's relevant. The book, obviously, there's a lot about art and obsession. And I do, for what you're saying, is almost the writing of the novel, it becomes an obsession for the writer. Because
Yes.
it's that character's there all the time saying hello.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's almost like a sort of meta thing that's going on, where the author is starting to get sucked into this whole deceptive process. You're kind of like part and parcel of it. You're almost, one of the, you're no longer the kind of witness. You're the you're an accomplice.
Yeah, you're the conduit
process,
that stories being told through.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, you mentioned, it's interesting that you mentioned Alistair Gray there, because one of the influences, I thought that this read a bit like a kind of gothic Alistair Gray, and then again you talk about putting the writer almost in the book and having that relationship with characters.
Yeah.
Certainly with Lanark and others, he does that.
Yeah.
Now I'm just presuming that's an influence, but is it? And are there others that you've got that you could tell us about?
Oh, I absolutely, and it was very much in my mind through the whole process that this was kind of like I think I said to you in an email once, it's like a humble kind of nod to these people, Alistair Gray and James Kilman and Agnes Owens too. I adore her work. I just think that kind of intense reality, and she's very funny as well. Her work is really funny. Too. I was thinking about this and I thought, well, actually, if it wasn't for them, I don't think I'd have even noticed that guy. The influence and their presence in my creative life is so powerful and so strong that they almost help me see and pick these moments in order to kind of like think about developing them. Otherwise, I don't think I would have spotted the weird guy in the gallery. It's something that wouldn't have happened. So they are certainly part of my creative life. But also, I think when I was writing the book, and you say it's about art, but I was thinking about the new Glasgow Boys as well, and growing up in the 80s, and that was another huge influence. And Stephen Campbell, and I was thinking about Stephen Campbell and his kind of self-portraits, or sort of very surreal portraits of men up mountains in tweed suits, battling with albatross and whatever it is they're battling with them up in the cliff top. That sort of stuff. I've always adored it, and it's that kind of sense of hyper reality and hyper intensity, that glorious technicolor that they create in their artwork that is beyond the normal, really, and the everyday.
It's an interesting touch point. Well, because for those people that weren't kicking about in the 80s and 90s, the Glasgow Boys, that generation of Howson and Campbell and and Conroy and all sorts of people.
Alison Watt actually too. Yeah. She was in there too. I think that very surreal.
Huge stars. I mean, they were as well known as writers and some musicians and things like that. These were really.
I feel very. I'm sure you probably feel the same, but I feel so lucky to have been growing up in that period. It's like a period of renaissance in creative arts in Glasgow, and just to be in amongst it, was spectacular. It was wonderful. I remember going into cafes and seeing Alistair Gray and his then wife, sitting at a table along the way, and you'd be like, "Oh God, I'll just go over and speak to them now." It was like these people were like rock stars, around that time. Spectacular. So that was a real influence, and important for me to try and somehow capture that in the book. Their presence, I think, in that process.
the other thing you mentioned, which I think is very interesting, is saying that you wouldn't really have taken notice of the guy in Madrid if it hadn't been for reading, you know, the people that you've mentioned. And I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
so, sometimes people overlook that there's an education process to, I mean, there's a pleasurable and, you know,
Totally.
to say there's an educational thing, because people make you see, whether it's the painters or whether it's writers or whoever, make you see the world in a different way, and you do carry
Yes.
that around with you. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
an image which talking about Agnes Owens,
Agnes Owens, yeah.
her at the beginning of one of her stories, she's got famously the dog in the pram being pushed around. It's
That's
such a
right.
great image.
Yes.
That I have found myself kind of almost half expecting to see that, you know, that
I know.
image.
It's so real, isn't it? It's so magnificent. And Tam Leonard and all those people. I mean, they're just like heroes, absolute heroes to me.
I do think it's you're absolutely right to say that. Reading whoever you read, you know, I probably won't go into a gallery and look at a large painting again after having read Jacob Boyce, because I've now got this idea that there's all these real hidden.
Is it moving?
Is it moving? You know, did I really see that out the corner of my eye? Something going on, and I think you do. Whoever you read, you get something on some different level from them. A couple of books that I also brought to mind. I'm going to mention them just for my own curiosity. But Andrew Crummie's Fits. Are you aware of that book?
No, actually.
Well, the obsession
sounds like I should be.
Yeah, well, it's PFITZ, and the obsession in that one is architecture.
Right.
And it's got a similar feel of the tunnel vision of the obsessive, which means that other things going on outside seem to be, you know, slightly different. And from the kind of, we haven't really touched upon the fact that it's also a thriller, and so, you know, the bit that we really don't want to get into too much. But there's a book book written by Frank Kuttner called A Very Quiet Street, which Polygon published back in, I'm going to say in the late 80s. But it's about it kind of takes real life events and fictionalizes some of them. It's a real mix between fiction and I just thought when reading your book, you know, because I knew the places, and as you say, they're a little off kilter, but there's reality there. I always think that's a really interesting thing to do, to bring your fiction into something that's so kind of recognizable.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. Yeah, I'll check those out, actually. They sound good.
So going back to the book, what were the practicalities of working on the book? You know, the kind of, how did you research people and places? You said you spent time in Spain.
It took a while. It took a wee while. I actually, I was lucky because one of my good friends is an art teacher and historian, and he helped me a lot with a lot of the background stuff around Velázquez, and I was fascinated with the guy for years, but actually, you know, just trying to, it comes back to that deception, trying to concoct something that would sound believable and sound as though it could be possibly true and feasible, and finding the language to do that. And it was similarly with even more so, I think, with the kind of the mathematics. I've had a few people have said, "Oh, I'm a bit scared of that book because it's got mathematics in it." There's absolutely no mathematics in it whatsoever. But what I did was I work at the university here, and I recruited. I got a guy who was then a PhD student. He was really into this, to help me concoct this Jacob's, or this old theory, you know, this theory of empirical wisdom that Jacob uncovers in the book, right? But what we did was, it was all that smoke and mirrors stuff. It was like, okay, I said to him, look, what we don't want is to just overload this with mathematics and no one understands. I don't want to have any. I want it to feel as though there is some, but there isn't actually any. And so he helped me construct the language around how mathematicians talk to each other, you know, because there's a scene where he goes and talks to a maths professor about this theory, and I said how they communicate with one another, you know, to make that real. And then he helped me come up with this crazy, mad theory, you know, about how, which is kind of like draws on sort of quantum physics and all that, but it's actually, there's nothing really there. It's just all, you know, an illusion. So when people read it, they think, oh God, is this maths? It's not. It's
I think
nonsense.
that's the clever thing throughout, is you're never sure what is. That's why I was thinking about the Frank Kupner book, which I know there's real life things. You're never sure who or what is real and what is absolute fiction. And you could go and probably Google and find, but I think you still wouldn't be entirely sure, because the whole point is that Jacob is finding out himself, you know.
That's right. And what I did was, so what I drew on real people are in there. I think there's a guy, Cellini, I think he was actually kind of real. And then there's elements of truth and elements of falsehood, and you kind of weave them together so that you create this kind of tapestry of confusion. I was really I love one of my favorite films is Orson Welles' F for Fake. I adore it, and every time I go back to it and watch it again, it's like you pick up something new about it, you know. A lot of the book I leaned on that film quite a lot. There's a because in F for Fake, I don't know if you're completely familiar with it, but there's Wells is living in Ibiza, some pre all the clubs and all of that. It was the sort of 50s, 60s, the bohemian Ibiza, and he befriends a forger, an art forger, a very famous art forger, and they have this relationship. And in the film, there's lots of conversations between the forger about reality and what's fake and so on. And of course, the forger in my book is kind of based very roughly on this character, this real character that existed. So it's kind of drawn on reality and then twisting it, turning the knife, you know, on it, which I really love to do.
Well, I think that's a great way of putting it. The kind of twisting the knife kind of happens, I think, throughout of it. So can you tell us a little bit about how the book, going back to this idea of becoming obsessed while you're writing it, there's some kind of dark and difficult themes in the book. Did you feel that affected you as a person while you were writing it? Was it easy to kind of put away at night, or was Jacob always kind of saying that?
He tended to linger about, you know. You had to kind of, you know, be quite firm with him, I think, at times, and tell him to bugger off. He was. There were certain points in the book, because it does get very intense, and I think it's difficult to shake it, for sure. And but also sometimes I think it's because he's almost like he's telling you that he's not quite happy with the direction of travel, and perhaps I'm missing another trick. So he would almost, as a separate person, would talk to you and say, I don't really think I would do that. I think you might want to think about doing it this way, you know, talking to myself really.
Yeah,
but it was kind of like he would help me, because you know, I developed such a strong sense of character around this guy. It was almost as though he was talking to me and saying, yeah, that's not really what I do now, you know. That's not where you've taken me. I think we should be going somewhere else. And there was a few changes, a few shifts in direction through the process, but often that would happen at sort of 3 a.m. and drive my wife crazy, you know, be up in the night scribbling.
And so how do you, hopefully this is a fairly simple question, but how do you know when it's done? If something has been so much in your mind and with you for a long period of time, how do you finally say, right, enough's enough, and, you know, cheerio?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because this is there is a first attempt at this book, actually. So I produced a first version of this back in 2012, and I was really unhappy with it, and I'm sure Jacob wasn't happy with it either. And I something didn't sit right at all with me.
Right.
And so I left it. I shelved it. It was published. It was published for a short time, and then I shelved it. I was really, I felt disappointed
Right.
with it in some way. There was something missing. It didn't quite work. So I shelved it, and it was kind of a bit traumatic to put the guy down, you know.
Yeah.
But then once I got my energies back for him, to deal with him, it took 2 or 3 years, you know, and then I decided I would have another go at this and see if I can re-examine it and enhance it and improve it and get to the point where I'm really, really happy with it. And that was so it's kind of like, and it is done now. There's no way he's gonna annoy me. But then again, you know, I did have a thought about a sequel the other
Really?
day.
Wow.
So he's maybe not quite finished with me. So it's a difficult one to say, yep, it's definitely done. But I think this book is
It's done.
certainly done. It
Yeah.
may not be done with Jacob,
Yeah.
but we're done for now. Before we're done in.
Well, I do wonder if that gets to, you know, having edited books. I know sometimes that during that process, you get to the stage where everyone involved is kind of like, well, this is as edited, this is as done as it's going to be.
Yeah,
But
that's
before
right.
you maybe hand that over, it's interesting that there was a whole different version that I presume had been through that process.
Yeah, that's right. And it was sort of like, you know, again, talk about deception. I was sort of like deceiving myself that it was okay.
Yeah.
And you get to that point, and you're a bit like wood for the trees, aren't you, as well, you know, by the end of a certain process. But I just thought I actually had deceived myself that it was okay. And it was almost as the second it was published, even before actually, I realized that there were missing pieces to Jacob's jigsaw that needed to be fixed and sorted. But I didn't have the courage to go back to it for a wee while, you know.
It's so interesting with this book in particular that's the story behind it. That, you know, you talk about deception and you got this, but I think this is fine, and then no, something's not quite right.
Exactly.
Because it runs that idea runs through the whole book, that something isn't quite right, and that there's an itch that Jacob has to, or a thing he has to pull at to see what, you know, where it goes, and that runs, you know, right through it. Even if
that's right, and I get to the point where you're thinking, well, has this obsession got a hold of me now, you know, and am I being drawn into this again because it's just, you know, this crazy obsession? But actually, now that I've worked through this process again and restructured and redesigned and added a whole new section to this book, I think that it was a worthy journey, and it wasn't an obsession, but it's not an unhealthy obsession. It was worth it, you know.
Well, I think it's been well worth it, because it's resulted in a fantastic book.
Thank you.
We mentioned we're in lockdown and things are very odd. What a time to bring out a strange book when it's the strangest of times.
Indeed, yeah, it's been tough. Yeah.
Has it been tough in terms of getting? I mean, did you have plans in terms of events or launches, or has that all had to be scrapped?
I think that was always on the cards. You know, I was planning on a Scottish launch. I live down in Bath at the minute. I'm in exile, but it was always kind of like a plan to have a Scottish launch, a couple of launches up there, and promote the book up there and promote it down here too. But that was shelved pretty quickly. It was pretty obvious that things were going you know, heading south, basically, for want of a better expression, and that was not going to happen. So then your attention turns to, you have to think, well, this is an online launch, and you have to kind of like get your head around what else can we do here to promote this book and launch it. But it's all the while you're juggling, you know, the realities of every day, and you know, the sort of the stresses and strains of lockdown and being at home, and all the strains that you've got with your family and all the rest of it. So it's not been easy. It's not an easy thing to do, really.
And so I take it that there can be no real plans for the future until things.
I think that we've got I'm hoping we've got. I've got another book coming out in October called Glasswork Humans, and that's a collaboration. It was a collaborative project with two of my writer friends, Paul Cowan and Gary Mackenzie. They're poet, short story writers. So we put together. We're getting published this book called Glasswork Humans, which is short stories and poetry collection, and I'm hoping that we can have a live launch of that in October, you know, up in Scotland, and I might find a way to Jacob you might gate crash, you know, one or two of these events, you know, as is his way. So there might be ways and means of doing something. I'm just hoping and praying that I can do something live, because it's, you know, and do readings and have a bit of a celebration, you know, and market. It's important to do these things.
Oh, without a doubt, absolutely. Yeah. It sounds like you won't be able to stop him making an appearance.
No, yeah, he's a right one.
Exactly. Dad knows. Well, I certainly hope, Tom, that this book does reach the readership it deserves, because it deserves a wide audience, no doubt about it. Thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're very welcome. It's been a joy, and lovely to meet you.
And you.
Yes.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.